Hello, I'm Trevor Ellis and welcome to the program. We're at Darwin in the Northern Territory and later on we'll be talking to some of Australia's Defence Force personnel from around the country. Don Bowie is an Army medic based in Cairns in far north Queensland, and Margaret Martin is an Air Force signals operator from Canberra. We also look at the State of the Environment report and how it affects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and look at important developments in Indigenous health. But first, Census 96. This August the 6th will be one of the most important days of the year for Indigenous people. That's when the Australian Bureau of Statistics will hold its census, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities need to take part. The census is the best way to get information on how many people there are in each part of Australia. The information collected must be accurate because it's used for many important things. The information can help you plan better services and facilities, such as where schools, health centres, new houses and even shops will be built, and many other things that communities need. In 1991, we know that over 265,000 people identified as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person. And we know how many of these people lived in the city, towns and in the country. We know all this information because of the census.
You'll find that the last couple of census figures that the population of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people has actually gone up. I mean, I think that we're finding that a lot more Aboriginal people are standing up and are being identified. And that's very important that, that we can stand up as Irish people and say, look, we're Aboriginal, we're proud to be Aboriginal, and be counted. If we get accurate figures, then we're going to have a lot more political pull, we're going to have a lot more pull with programs and services that government agencies produce.
Depending on where you live, either a collector will drop off a form for you to fill out or someone will come and talk to you. If you live in a more remote area, the person who will see you about the census will most likely be someone from your own community, somebody who was chosen after talks with your community council. For Indigenous people living in urban or rural areas, a collector will drop off a form for you to fill in, which will be picked up later. The census involves everybody in Australia. Collectors will be calling on every house, caravan, tent, campsite, hospital, everywhere that people live. The questions on the census forms have been carefully chosen so that not only do they provide the right information, but they'll be easy to understand and answer. One of the questions asks whether you are of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander origin. It does take time and some effort to fill out the form correctly, but it's very important for you and your community that the information is collected and the information you give is right. Another important issue you should be aware of is that the information that you give on Census Day will only be used by the ABS for statistical purposes. It will not be given to any other government agency or department.
When they start filling out the forms, they should be confident that the information they do give is confidential and only be used for the census figures, that the information that they give won't be given to the Department of Social Security, it won't go to the Department of Housing, that it'll only be used as figures for the census and it'll be used for government statistics, not for individual purposes.
The last census was held in 1991, but a lot has changed since then. For example, nearly half the population has moved house. Where did they go? What are they doing? And are they getting the right services in their new location? The census is the best way to collect this information. That's why it's used all around the world. So on the 6th of August this year, it's very important that all Indigenous people and communities stand up and be counted. The environment is big news. There's hardly a day goes by without a story hitting the headlines. And with conflicting claims by various interest groups, it's often hard to know what the real situation is. So how do we get to know the facts about the condition and well-being of the country? Well, one of the best ways is by State of the Environment reporting, and the 1996 report is the most detailed ever done in Australia.
The State of the Environment report is a comprehensive look at the entire Australian environment, so it considers our atmosphere, our land, our inland waters, our rivers, estuaries and seas, our plant and animal species, our human settlements, where we live and how we live, and the way we look after our natural and cultural heritage. The report spells out where the current problems are, what things we're doing well, what things we're doing badly, what are the most urgent areas that need attention.
In terms of Indigenous health, what are the key areas in the report?
Well, Indigenous people have not shared the health improvements that most Australians have enjoyed this century, and their average life expectancy is still 15 or 20 years less than that of most Australians. Some of the causes are environmental. For example, more than 2,000 Indigenous people don't have reasonable drinking water. Many don't have adequate waste systems. And these environmental problems cause health problems in the Aboriginal and Islander community. But we also draw attention to the fact that all Australians can learn from the traditions of Indigenous people of living sustainably, living in harmony with natural systems. Much European practice in agriculture in our towns is not sustainable because it's not compatible with natural systems.
The 1996 report was prepared by over 200 experts, covering all aspects of the Australian environment. Among them was Bill Jonas, Principal of the Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies.
It's important that all culture and heritage get covered in the report, but the basis for all culture and heritage in Australia is Indigenous heritage. This is a heritage which we know goes back at least 40,000 years, and it's also an extremely unique heritage. And the places which we think should be protected as part of our environment are very important Indigenous places. One of the most important issues is to do with languages and the fact that language as an aspect of and an expression of our culture for Indigenous people has largely been lost. And once we lose the language, we lose knowing the way in which people have looked at the world and the way in which people have viewed the environment. And people say, well, everybody's got to learn to speak English anyway, but a lot of the concepts in Indigenous languages don't translate into English, or a lot of the concepts from English don't translate into Aboriginal languages. So it's terribly important that languages be maintained and we don't lose any more than we've already lost.
The report also covers the growing interest in Indigenous-based tourism and the adverse effect it can have on our heritage. But the increasing involvement of Indigenous people in land management, like at Uluru-Kata National Park, is seen as an important development. Here in the Torres Strait Islands, traditional foods like the turtle and dugong can still be an important part of the diet for some communities. The State of the Environment report has even considered the impact of environmental pressures on these creatures and the people who feed off them. The State of the Environment report does not pretend to provide all the answers. What it does is to make people aware of these important issues and hopefully help motivate all Australians to protect the environment as best they can. If you want to know more about the report, contact the Department of Environment, Sport and Territories at this address. The executive summary is available now, with the full report due out soon.
The report is basically just a report on the state of things as they exist now. So we haven't glossed over anything. We've talked about the good things, we've talked about the areas where there are problems, and our terms of reference don't take us any further than that. We'll now present the report to government, and of course a lot of the decisions which need to be made would be decisions to be made by politicians. But what we hope will come out of it in the first instance is that it will be very widely read, very widely distributed and very widely considered.
I hope the report will do two things. I hope in the short term it will sound a warning signal that many aspects of our past behaviour are not sustainable and that we need to pay urgent attention to these problems. For the long term, I hope it changes attitudes. It's meant to be the first of a series of reports at 4-year intervals, and we are also committed to establishing environmental indicators so that we can monitor progress. Unless we build environmental awareness into all our decision making, we really have very serious problems in the future.
Australia's Defence Force offers a whole range of employment opportunities for Indigenous people serving in today's Navy, Army or Air Force. These jobs can incorporate any number of different skills, including trade and professional level qualifications. There are currently about 500 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people serving in the armed forces in a whole range of different occupations. And over the next 5 years, the Defence Force recruiting branch hopes to increase this number to over 1,000. One way they hope to achieve this is by featuring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Indigenous Australians video program.
We're trying to get more people to in the services to make up a good representation. For example, the Aboriginal and Islander population in Australia makes up approximately 2% of the population as a whole. So what we're trying to do is to get that representation in the armed services. We're going around talking to serving at-sea personnel in the Army, Navy and Air Force, getting their views on the services, and we're putting those on videos to go out to the communities. Hopefully that will encourage more students to stay at school longer, to get better marks, and to think of the services as a career.
One person who's made a name for herself in the armed forces is Margaret Martin, who works for the Air Force as a signals operator in the sensitive area of communications. Originally from Broome, she's based in Canberra at the moment and has been with the Air Force for almost 10 years.
Initially I joined because I just wanted something different, and I thought joining the military was the go. So I joined the Air Force and I've been doing the same job for the 10 years. And I like it because I've got to travel all over Australia, which I probably wouldn't have done if I hadn't joined the Air Force. And I've met so many people. My own independence in that has developed as well, because you're always adapting every time you're posted. I just work days at the moment, so I can do things like play sport and do small courses at the colleges here and just generally get my life organised a bit better. So yeah, I'm getting used to Canberra now.
Don Bowie is a sergeant in the Australian Regular Army. He works as a medic for the 51st Far North Queensland Regiment based in Cairns and has been in the Army for over 17 years.
I look after all the reserve soldiers throughout the battalion, that's looking after their health. Also run combat first aid courses, ensuring that they're up to date in their inoculation, and also their medical board. It's a challenge really, because when you're working with sick people, you get the rewards out of them because you can apply the right treatment that you've learnt over the years.
One of the benefits of being in the Army for Don has been the opportunity to travel.
What I like really about the Army is the friendship. Also, just get to travel around Australia, and plus it was an opportunity for me to go and do a tour over in Malaysia, and plus going over to France and Belgium to do the guard with the 75th anniversary of the Western Front.
Don's work also takes him home to the Torres Strait to speak to young kids, encouraging them to think about a career in the armed forces.
The benefit they could get of joining the Defence Force is they could get experience within themselves, what lies in front of them in the Defence Force, and they've got a lot to offer. And also being away from the family and coming back, they mature quickly and they have more responsibilities lie upon them. And it's a good thing for the young kids in the Torres Strait if they ever get in the Department of Defence. If you can read me that line in.
Don and Margaret have both made a career for themselves in Australia's Defence Force. It's a lifestyle that they would recommend to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person interested in serving in the Navy, Army or Air Force.
The encouragement would be get good marks for a start in the secondary education, and also to ask for advice from the career advising system in the Defence Force, and also to be encouraged by their family. That's the biggest thing, is by their family to help them along.
It's a secure work environment, and I suppose you have to look at both sides of it, because you're going to get posted away probably from your home state or your hometown. You're going to be going on exercises probably. You're going to be working shift work, things like that, and you're going to have the discipline of the military. But then you're going to, if you like travel, if you like meeting people, like if you're young, you know, and if that's sort of what you want to do, you can also do educational courses to further your education. So yeah, I'd definitely do it.
If you want to find out any more information about joining Australia's Defence Force, just call 13 1901 or visit your nearest Defence Force recruiting centre. They'll be glad to give you all the information that you need. The health of Australia's Indigenous people is a major concern for all Australians. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have the worst health of all Australians and are one of the most disadvantaged groups in the community. At a meeting of Australian health ministers last year, each state and territory committed themselves to sign agreements aimed at improving the health of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. These agreements will seek to improve the health of Indigenous people through the better allocation of services, improved access to health services and better cooperation with all levels of government. The first agreement was signed recently in Adelaide by representatives from the federal and state governments, ATSIC, and the Aboriginal Health Council of South Australia, representing Aboriginal medical services. Afterwards, I spoke to the Federal Minister for Health and Family Services, Dr. Michael Wooldridge, about what the new arrangements mean.
It means, for the first time, the Commonwealth Government, the State Government, ATSIC and the Aboriginal Health Council, the AMSs, are all going to be working in the same direction. We're not going to be pulling in different directions. We're going to sit down around a table, thrash out our problems, and we're going to sign a bit of paper to commit all of us to do that.
How do you think it's going to improve Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health?
By itself, it might not do a lot, but this is an essential building block. We should have done this 20 years ago. What it's going to do is commit us all to working in the same direction rather than working in different directions. And what it's also going to do is put a bigger focus on mainstream services. The majority of Aboriginal people get their health through mainstream services, and they should be more culturally sensitive, and they should be aware of the needs of Aboriginal people. That's not to put down AMSs at all. They've got a very important role to play, but it'll help both. It'll give AMSs a seat at the table, and hopefully it'll do something with mainstream services to make them more aware of the needs of Aboriginal people.
This is the first agreement between a state and Commonwealth. When do you think the other state and territories will follow?
Well, our officials have been talking. Most of the other states and territories are enthusiastic, and there's a good chance within a couple of months we will have these agreements signed everywhere in Australia. This is the first, though, and that's a credit to Mike Armitage in South Australia, who were very enthusiastic early on.
Minister, how are you going to make sure that these principles are actually put in place?
Well, I'd say two things about that. The first is there's going to be a forum in each state that will be looking at how well all of us are doing in this, and that will keep the oversight. But the second thing I'd say is this isn't going to work without a bit of goodwill. The previous government, the way they tried to do things was bring out a big stick, whether it was in health, whether it was in Aboriginal affairs. Now that didn't seem to work. They weren't able to force the states with a big stick to do what they wanted. I'm trying a different approach. I'm trying to use a bit of goodwill and to see if we can get somewhere with that. I think that goodwill is there at the moment between myself, between Mike Armitage, between ATSIC and the Aboriginal Health Services, and I hope that can translate into something that's worthwhile for Aboriginal people.
Minister, what would you say to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people about these changes?
What I'd say is these changes give a legitimate voice to Aboriginal people and their organisations in the planning process. In themselves, they're not going to change the world, but they're an essential building block in trying to get things right. It's a building block that should have been in place ages ago. If we're going to make big improvements, it's going to be a long, hard slog. At least these changes today hopefully mean we're all pulling in the same direction, and over time I hope they'll show real benefits for Aboriginal people.
I also spoke with Peter Miller, the chairperson of the Aboriginal Health Council of South Australia, and asked him how the new agreement will help Indigenous health.
The aims of this, it's improving access to both mainstream and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Pacific health and health-related programs and Pacific health services throughout the country. In that I mean you've got in South Australia you've got Ceduna Cuniba Health Service based at Ceduna, you've got Yalata Maralinga based in Yalata, you've got Port Lincoln Health Service, Aboriginal Health Service, Pickawee down at Port Augusta. It reflects on the mainstream, and the mainstream that I'm talking about is the hospitals that are based in the city, like the Royal Adelaide, the Queen Elizabeth. They are the mainstream services that I'm sort of looking at that we've tapped into over the years, and the continuation of those services should be working a lot better with the agreement that is about to be signed.
If you would like to find out any more information about how the new agreement will affect you or your community, you can speak to the State Coordinator on these numbers. Well, that's all we have for you in this program. Remember, next time we'll be talking to more Indigenous servicemen and women from around the country about their careers in Australia's armed services. See you next time.
When